Floris, welcome to the show. It's a great pleasure to have you on the show today.
Very happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Like me, our listeners have been a great fan of math specifically, and we will talk a lot about that. And we will get to that in a few minutes from now. But I was thinking, let's get started with how did running happen to you? And other than you being a runner, who are you to people that people should resonate with?
Yeah, so I can give you a bit of a breakdown here. So
Yeah.
I grew up in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. I lived there until I was about 20 years old and really grew up skateboarding. That was my big passion. And then when I was about 21, I graduated college in Amsterdam, or just outside of it, and moved to America. I really wanted to work in skateboarding, and I worked for Tony Hawk, like the famous skateboarder.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So for several years, we traveled all over the place, and I helped set up a lot of different events, and that was really a big passion for me. But then eventually, I started, I ran a little bit here and there growing up, but not that much. And I kept getting injured from running. So I decided, from skateboarding. So I decided, let's actually start running a little bit more, because I could really get a lot of energy, release a lot of energy that I normally would release in skateboarding, would bring that over to running. And that was really how it all started for me. I basically at the beginning was just running a little bit here and there. And then I decided I want to sign up for my first marathon. And that to me was, I didn't really know what I was doing. So I ended up going through a training cycle. I ran very irregularly, but then eventually ran my first marathon. And that was a challenge. Just like many other runners, going into a race, having the race nerves, and eventually getting to a point in the race that you hit the wall and you think you're never going to do this again, and eventually finding a way over that to finish the first marathon. And after that first marathon, I really told myself, I'm never going to do another marathon again. This is why did I even do this? And then it wasn't until a little bit later that I decided, okay, I truly do want to give this another go. I, at the time, started working more in the corporate world. I ended up working for one of the larger publicly traded companies. I became the VP of Marketing and Innovation, and had quite a few responsibilities. And I started noticing I was kind of starting to get a bit out of shape and everything. So eventually just wanted to start training more consistent, started to run more, and then from there on actually ended up discovering Dr. Phil Maffetone on one of the podcasts from Trail Runner Nation. And they interviewed him, and all of a sudden things started to click, because he mentioned the concept of slowing down in your runs to actually improve your fat burning abilities and to improve your aerobic system. And that was all new to me. For me, training previously was always about going out there, running pretty hard and finishing a workout and really not having much energy left anymore. And I wasn't paying attention to what I was eating or whatnot. And so all of a sudden, once I started switching some of these things, things started to click very well. And all of a sudden, I realized that everything was connected between nutrition, between how you train, your running intensity, about how you recover, how you sleep, all of these different things. And that's when all of a sudden in the second training cycle towards that race, towards the next race, it all started falling into place. And I ended up running my second marathon. The first one was in 4 hours and 11 minutes. And the second one was in 2 hours and 55 minutes. So all of a sudden I started, I shaved off whatever that was, 85 minutes or something. And so that was a big improvement. And from there on ended up shaving off more and more time. But yeah, it's been a very enjoyable learning experience. And then from there on, eventually started my own running podcast, the Extra Milest Show. I ended up learning a lot, surrounding myself with a lot of different experts. And as I continued to learn more and more, people started to reach out if I could coach them, and eventually started coaching more and more people, and ended up developing several different coaching programs. And at this point, we have our personal best coaching program with more than 500 people in it, like runners from all over the world. And it's been really fun to just see people like progress in their training.
Beautiful. You covered the whole experience as a runner and as a coach. I can resonate with a lot of what you said also, because almost every runner, when they get started recreationally, and if they do not have a coach who's there to guide them, I guess will resonate with everything that you just said. We all go through this journey. I think marathon teaches more than the academics at times. I would feel you reach the finish line and you feel shattered in many ways, and you're like, I'm never going to do this. And it's only a few weeks later that you restart all over again. So let's break your journey down into a few pieces by starting to understand when you did your 4 hours 11 minute in the marathon, as you were training for it, what were some of the things that you think you were not doing right? I'm sure even though it was 4 hours 11 minutes, it still is a respectable time for a beginner. A lot of people have this as their PR goals, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So how were you training? What were the kind of mileages you had? What was your typical training program, if you remember? Or it was just that you were going out and running every day with the same intensity and pace?
Yeah, so I did end up signing up with a local running group and a
Mm-hmm.
local running coach, but there was very little talk about running intensity. There was very
Right.
little talk about, and at the time I was also working like crazy hours. I was working with Tony Hawk, and like there was literally days that I would be doing events until 2 o'clock in the morning, and then the next day I would have to do my run, and I would just or I would sometimes skip runs. So it was quite irregular when I look back at it. The training volume was also not very high. And I think I see that quite a bit with beginner runners. The difference between beginner runners and some more advanced runners is a lot of beginner runners try to improve their running on 2 runs a week. And it's like, oh yeah, maybe 2 times a week or 3 times a week. And then when I was looking at several of these training plans, they all had in there 5 runs a week or sometimes 6 weeks. And I was like, why would people be running that much? But like at the end of the day, it is about the consistency. And it later on started clicking to me that it is not about that 1 or 2 workouts in the week. It's an overall training volume that over time starts stacking up. And so I think I've really made the mistake at the beginning of just running too irregular. Some weeks I would be very motivated and run 5, 6 times a week. The next week I would feel very tired from all of the training efforts or my other work activities that I would run only once a week or skip a whole week of running or whatnot. And it would just not build up your fitness in a healthy, progressive way over time. There would be fast progress and then regress. And so there was not much consistency in there. And then also not paying any attention to what I was eating, really. So if you're eating, like at the time, I was a bit younger as well, but I would be eating sometimes junk food. I would be eating pizzas or hamburgers, or sometimes more bread or all of these different things. And I would feel quite tired and fatigued in the afternoon. And I would just start drinking coffee to get over that fatigue level, instead of actually looking like, what is going on here? Maybe my body is not responding so well to all of the food that I'm putting in there, all of the junk food or the high carbs or whatnot. And so that was also a difference from that first training cycle to later on, starting to fine tune some more with the nutrition and seeing how the body responds to that. So I was not in tune with like a consistent strategy or a plan, and that eventually going into race day kind of led to it as well. Like I was just going out, not with a plan of like, I'm going to run this pace, I'm going to try to hold back at the beginning. It was just like, I feel good, let's go. And then eventually you really get your ass handed to you in the second half of the race when you just don't have that much energy left anymore. So
yeah, specifically the last quarter of any marathon is a journey in itself. It's a marathon in itself.
Oh,
Okay,
100%.
right?
Absolutely.
For almost every marathon I have done, I feel from kilometer 32 to kilometer 42, I'm not sure why I even signed up for that. I would keep thinking every time. So I can relate with that.
Even though there are ways to train that,
Yeah.
like, so later on I started splitting up a marathon into 3 parts, where the first half of the marathon, like up to 21K, I often see it as a warm-up. then 21K to about 30K, 32K is like, all right, you really got to get to work. But the race really doesn't start until that last 6 miles, 10K, because
True.
everything you've done in the beginning, if you try to shave off even 30 seconds per kilometer or 15 seconds per kilometer early on, it might cost you several minutes per kilometer later on. So,
You will pay back horribly, right? If you did that mistake, and it only comes with experience, with so much of experience and being self-aware as to what's going on in those last kilometers. Let's spend some time on your orientation with Maffetone method.
Yes.
And I wanted for us to spend significant amount of our discussion towards Maffetone method for our listeners who want to possibly get to it or who are already doing it and want to know more. Let's acquaint them with what exactly that is. We've seen how you improved from 4:11 to a PR, then of being a sub 3, and then further improving to being a sub 2:45. How did you think MAF really helped, that method really helped you, and how it helped other runners by running at slower paces?
Yeah, and I can basically take a step back first and explain the overall workings of the MEF training approach, and then from there on actually see if you want to experiment with it, how you can best go about it. So there's a few different elements to it. The main one, like one of the key ones, is actual running intensity, where you want to focus your body on using body fat for energy. And there's two different fuel sources that you use when you're running. Two main ones, the one being body fat and the other one being glucose. So you're burning sugar in your body. And a lot of runners, when you run at a higher intensity, you're going to be going to that glucose for energy, but there's only a very short supply of that. So you're going to start running out of it really quickly. Whereas if you start running below a certain heart rate intensity, you start to really use that body fat efficiently. And that takes time to develop that. And so the biggest thing is most athletes out there are running at that higher intensity and never really tap into their fat burning abilities. Once you start going to run at a certain intensity, and we'll talk about the 180 formula or C2 training in a little bit here, all of a sudden you really notice, or most people will notice, that they have to slow down significantly to get their heart rate within that certain training zone. And several runners will say, at the beginning, it's quite challenging, or I have to take walk breaks, or I have to run at a very slow pace, much slower than I'm used to. But what your body is doing, it is truly starting to utilize that fat for energy source. And that does take time. That can take several months to start building that and developing that. So this is the actual running component to it. Then there's also the nutritional component to it, of like eating balanced meals that improve your fat burning abilities as well. And with nutrition, I think there's a lot of different approaches, and what works for one person might not necessarily work for another person. However, I do think quite a few people can benefit from cutting out some of the junk in that food and actually starting to eat more whole foods, like true vegetables, true fruits, proteins in animal products, if you like to go that route, or there's alternatives for that as well. But so there's that component by actually eating clean, that helps improve your fat burning abilities. And for myself, I've noticed that I respond quite well to a lower carb, a little bit higher fat intake. And this has worked quite well for several other athletes using this approach. But then again, some athletes respond better to a little bit higher carb intake. So there is some customization and personalization needed there. And then the other big one from this approach too is the whole stress management. Because this is, I think, what a lot of people don't talk about. For you to improve in your running, you need to have your stress management under control as well. And I think especially with the COVID pandemic that we just had, people realized that their stress levels can be quite high. And all of a sudden, they might be able to handle less training volume, or they might not progress in their training that much, or like all of these different things come into play. So anything that we can do to keep our stress levels under control as well. And there's a variety of different ways that can be done. But this all ties into, and then there's the rest, the recovery, getting enough sleep. All of these different things are connected in a holistic way to make you improve as an athlete. So it's not just looking at that running component, but looking at all of these other things as well, what we can do across the board to optimize our body for performance. And so let's talk for a little bit about the running intensity, because you want to talk about that as well. So different ways to calculate what heart rate you should be training at, but one of the ways is the 180 formula, which is 180 minus your age. So let's say you're an athlete who's 40 years old. You take 180 minus your age is 140. And then from there on, you customize that number by your health or lifestyle. So there's basically going to be a modification over there. So let's say you just come back from an injury, you have to deduct 5 beats. If you've just been well overtrained or burned out, you have to deduct 10 beats. If you've been training consistently for up to the last 2 years, you can actually start adding +5. And there's different modifications over here. And you can find out more on Dr. Phil Maffetone's website about some of these further details. But basically, you get to a number. Let's say the number is 180 minus 40. Your training zone is going to be 140 to 130. So you have 10 beats below it. And that is a rough guideline that works quite well for the majority of athletes. And does this work perfectly for everyone? No, there's always going to be outliers. People who might have an exceptionally high max heart rate, people who have a very much lower heart rate, but at least it gives a ballpark number that most athletes will have to slow down their running intensity. And you aim for the next 2-3 months to train the majority of your runs at that run or at that intensity. And from there on, it is fascinating because even in my own example, I started out running at an 8:30 minute mile pace. And sorry, this is a minute mile. I'm not sure exact kilometer transformation over here.
Yeah, it will be about 5:30 approximately.
Yeah. So after 1 month, I started noticing the same 5 kilometer or the 5 mile loop. All of a sudden, I started improving by about 30 seconds per mile. And then every month, I started becoming a little bit faster at the same heart rate. And 18 months later, all of a sudden, I was able to shave that down to a 6:10 minute mile. And so it is fascinating to see how, yes, with the majority of higher intensity or lower intensity, then eventually sprinkling in some higher intensity, you can become quite faster at the same heart rate. Could that have been approached by other training methods? Absolutely. I don't think that this is the only training method that will get you there. But I do think a lot of athletes get injured quite frequently. A lot of athletes get burned out. And this, I think, is one training approach which minimizes your chances of injury, because there truly is a period of time where you allow your body to become stronger and to really increase your muscle strength, your tendons, your ligaments, your joints, your bones, all of these different things before you start adding in some speed work or some higher intensity or some longer runs. So this is why I think that this approach works quite well for different athletes. Also, the actual health element. So if someone has recently experienced injuries or gets quite a few colds or sicknesses, then you actually end up training at a lower intensity than when you're constantly improving. And you're so I think that there's something very special there, that you can truly modify your running intensity based on your health and fitness profile there.
True. There's so much again here, and I have a number of other curious questions, but I can again resonate with what you just said. In fact, this January, I started to try the same method on me. With the COVID being around, none of us were training, didn't have access to a treadmill back then. And January, when I restarted running, after possibly a complete break of about 8 months, having not run, just gained more than 10 pounds. Definitely, it wasn't looking healthy on me. And I remember on in the first week of January, it was at 7:48 pace, not per mile, but kilometer was my pace when I went out. And when I was in my Maffetone, I was looking at 138 to 148. And I remember I was trying to be as close to 148 so that I can still call it a Maffetone. And then 2 weeks ago, I remember, for the same distance, actually it was for more distance. Earlier it was 16 kilometers that day, and this time it was 24 kilometers. It was 5:58.
Wow.
So you can see that what you said is exactly so true, and that's why I got even more interested that it works. In this case, I did not even account for when I ran 2 weeks ago the weather condition, which was at least 5 degree warmer. It was 75% humidity, and also another thing was that there was 100 meters of elevation in the route this time. Still, I could get to 5:58. And I was amazed with the way body responds. So now, taking a cue from what you said, let's try and understand how does that really work? How the slow heart rate really affect you? You talk about fat being used as an energy source, but in certain ways, when you look at in the research as well as in papers, you would see that fat is not an effective energy source, specifically when you are not competing, but when you are working in an endurance sport or this kind of setting. So how do you think this helps when people are running or starting to train to utilize fat as an energy source instead of carbohydrate?
Well, the biggest difference is that like carbohydrates, like they burn in a much faster way, whereas the fat will end up burning in a much slower, more sustainable way. And this is also when you truly look at the race distance, whether it's a half marathon or a marathon, the majority, like 90+% of your energy is going to come from your aerobic system. And your aerobic system functions very, very well with fat as fuel source if it is developed properly. And this is where most people don't have their body properly developed, that their body can utilize their body fat efficiently as a fat burning source. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind here too is for you to move forward is this is kind of an interesting topic to dive into a little bit further, because for you as an athlete to run forward, there's going to be, your energy is going to go to two different parts. One is the part of you actually moving forward. The other part is actually you cooling your body down or heating your body up. So the thermal regulation. And one interesting one, what you just said about, in India, the heat, the humidity is a big factor. We see this all the time in athletes running with this approach as well, where they're trying to train at a relative lower intensity, yet their heart rate starts to go up rather quickly as well. Because at some point, if there's quite a bit of heat or quite a bit of humidity involved, you're going to use much more energy towards body thermal regulation than you moving your body forward. This is also why I do think athletes can significantly benefit from actually training for the heat. And this can be done in a variety of ways that we could talk about in a little bit here too. But you being able to properly cool your body down will already improve your MAF pace as well, will already improve your running performance as well. And this is why often at the beginning of a season, once it has been cold and it starts warming up again, you start seeing slower times in the initial stages. Then once the body has gone through quite a bit of heat adaptation, and it becomes much more normal for you to be outside in some of these hotter weather conditions. But there are different things that you can train here as well, through sauna training or through multiple layers of gear, wearing it specifically for certain workouts, and really constantly going about heat adaptation in the earlier stages of training too.
Yeah. Thankfully, we don't have to do that here. It's enough warm and humid both. So that way it helps. Okay, now let's understand this further. So at what stage of periodization or at what stage of training, if someone wants to get started with math method, when should someone start? Is it when I'm out 6 months from my marathon, or is it much earlier during off season, or how should that be for a recreational runner, for example?
I'm always a big fan of zooming out more and truly looking over longer periods of time. Like, what are your goals 12 months out, 24 months, 36 months? I think a lot of runners want to have progress and race really well in the next 6 weeks or really well in the next 3 months, or whereas it takes time for your body to develop. It takes time, like it takes years and years eventually for many athletes to start reaching that peak. And this is where I think the best time to start is today. And this is truly one of those things of like you just going out there and starting to run at an intensity that is most probably for most listeners lower than what they normally run, and just starting to experiment with what it is like to put in some consistent training, to finish a workout, still have energy left in the tank, being able to run more consistently, and even being able to handle a little bit more training volume. Do that for, let's say, 10 weeks, 3 months. And after that, you start analyzing like, okay, how am I improving? How is my math pace improving? If everything is improving really well and you're still shaving off more and more time, like, yeah, at that point you can decide, like, do I want to continue training this way? Do I find this enjoyable? Do I want to start adding in some more speed work? Or if your race is, let's say, like coming up in another 3 months from that period, like, yeah, starting to add in some race specific training, some speed work, some longer runs, some race pace runs, just so you become familiar with what race pace feels like, can absolutely be beneficial at that point. But I think too many people focus too much of their time and energy on the higher intensity workouts, whereas that is not going to carry you through the 30K mark where it's going to start feeling challenging. The lower intensity runs, the basic base building foundation is what's going to carry you to be able to finish strong, because that's eventually you being able to utilize your body fat more efficiently, versus the higher intensity, I think, is icing on the cake, really.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point of zooming out a bit. And I'm a very strong proponent of that too, because if you don't do this, you'll be forced to do that, where you're very quickly going to get injured, and or you're going to invite demotivation primarily because you're not meeting your goals, right? So it makes absolute sense. Now, you talked about, say, someone spent about 8 to 10 weeks, 12 weeks in getting the aerobic pace right, starting to make certain improvements, and now body is ready. Say the base of the pyramid has been built, and now you can start to sharpen the edges. How many weeks out, just very typical template, I'm thinking, say someone is preparing for their first half marathon, how many weeks out they should start to consider including some of these speed runs, whether strides or intervals, thresholds, or anything else for that matter?
Yeah, it obviously depends on the actual race distance. For a 5K, 10K, or even half marathon, that's going to be a shorter period typically than for a full marathon. But even in a 6 or 8 week period of time, like on top of like the base that you've already built, you can accomplish a lot of different things. I think a lot of people start right away at the beginning of a training cycle to add in speed work, and that becomes a big part of their training. Whereas if you first have that base, get that under control, and from there on start adding that in. And for a half marathon, that might be 8 weeks, that might be 10, 12, might be 6. Sometimes it also depends on how does it best line up with your next race. Like sometimes we can make this ultimate plan of like, now I want to do this much base building, and then from there on, but if that doesn't necessarily line up with your race that you've already signed up with, you might have to get a little bit creative with how long of a base building period do you want to do, and how much of a race specific period do you want to do that.
Sure. Couple of other very elementary questions before we dial into racing specifically. One is, if someone does not have access to heart rate monitor, for example, specifically chest heart rate monitor, because as you know, the optical ones are not as accurate and give such flawed readings, and it just becomes a matter of worry than they being productive on a number of occasions. So is there any other way for you to be able to establish your effort for people to be in the Maffetone zone?
Yes, there are different ways, and some of them I think are better than others. You being able to have a conversation pace, you being able to talk with another runner while you're like running, and you're able to talk comfortable sentences instead of like just gasping for air and getting shorter ones. That's one way, but that is open for quite a bit of interpretation, because for some athletes that might be a perceived effort of 5 or 10 beats higher than for another person, because it's your own judgment call. I think obviously being able to run with a specific running form that feels like you're not like getting way out of running form. When you finish a workout, you want to make sure that you still have quite a bit of energy left and you can do that workout again. Otherwise, it's probably that you've done that workout at too high of an intensity. There are some people who say nasal breathing is one of the measurements. I don't think nasal breathing is that good of a measurement, purely because nasal breathing is very trainable. What feels comfortable at the beginning, or what feels uncomfortable at the beginning, 6 weeks later might feel very comfortable. Some people also have bigger nostrils. Some people are running with devices. So I think that is not necessarily the best measure, I think. But I think the talk test is a simple enough test for most people to get an idea if you don't necessarily have access to a chest strap.
Got it. And do you suggest any Maffetone method test over regular intervals to see how you're improving as you get started with it?
Yeah, so for those who don't necessarily know what a MEF test is, you basically go to a running track or to a local route that is ideally relatively flat. You warm up for, let's say, 15 minutes, and then you start running, and you measure after 1 kilometer what your time is. And you do that for, let's say, 3 kilometers, 5 kilometers, 8 kilometers, and every kilometer at that MEF heart rate, you typically start becoming a little bit slower as cardiac drift is going to start kicking in. Yeah. And so doing a MEF test is a great way to at least get an idea of what is your baseline fitness at this point. And then I would highly suggest you write down what the temperature is at that point as well. And then let's say you do it again a month later, you actually see what is your pace at that point. Have you actually improved? Let's say your first kilometer is in 8 minutes per kilometer, and then the second might be in 8:15. The third kilometer might, well, the next month that 8 minutes per kilometer might have become 7:40 minutes per kilometer. And just like the example that you mentioned earlier, Vikas, was where you started out in January, you were 7 something, and you were able to bring that down to a 5 something 6 months later. And this is why I do think getting an idea of how you're progressing, how your body is responding to this training approach is a good way of seeing if it's working well for you.
True. And a couple of experiences from when I was doing it, and a few of my other friends, in fact, another very close friend of mine who lives in Germany, we both tried at the same time. We both improved in a very similar way, and it's just been phenomenal. But there's one question that kept coming to me all the time was that, hey, you are too slow. You are going too slow. And so these experiences are common, and our listeners should be aware that at times it will be that you even need to stop to be in that zone. You need to just brisk walk. Maybe you can't even run in the very early days, but that's just normal. And while this run might not look great for your social media, but it's going to help you become an improved runner for sure, right? And so I want to see if there is anything. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest mind shift starts changing when you don't start looking at pace and distance anymore, but you start looking at time on your feet. And
Yeah.
that doesn't matter whether you're running, whether you're walking, like at the end of the day, time on your feet in your Maffetone is gonna be your workout right there. And this is also like where a lot of people have to take walk breaks. A lot of, like even myself, if I go run on the trails and there's a hill, I will for sure be walking. And over time, I've developed quite a bit aerobically, and still I'm taking quite a bit of walk breaks here or there. Also, I think, yes, it is going to be challenging at the beginning, but
Yeah.
knowing that this is a short-term sacrifice for a longer-term payoff, because this base is not going to go away instantly either. Like it is that it's going to really have a lot of rewards that you're going to start building upon once you have developed that good aerobic base. Also,
Yeah.
I think some people, there's still ways that you can get some higher or faster runs in. For example, you can walk up a hill and
Yeah.
start running down and leaning forward, or you can still do some 8-second strides, and that way you still keep your heart rate at a relative low intensity. Also,
True.
I think a lot of people end up being so strict about it that if they see the heart rate go over just a little bit, they feel like, they start to panic. Where I'm like, if you want to go on one group run a week because you want to run with your friends, go for it. Don't look at your heart rate at one time. But then the other workouts, try to have the purpose for that you do actually end up running with a lower intensity there. So there's a few different ways that you can just make some changes in your mind that come in handy here.
Yeah, very, very, very practical. You also emphasized on stress management, sleep, nutrition, and recovery. And these all are very important components of being good anywhere, to be honest. But in case of running and improving endurance performances, how did you specifically go about managing stress? Is there any specific way that you suggest? There are pranayamas, breathing, etc., that does exist, but is there anything that you adapted to that worked for you?
Yes, I think the most underutilized tool for endurance athletes is quality, consistent sleep. And that
Yep.
sounds indirect to stress management, but at the end of the day, our bodies are so well designed to reset itself overnight to be able to handle stress very well. And this is why we often feel energized in the morning. We often feel alive in the morning. And yes, there are different ways of going about that. I think the biggest one here is consistent bedtime routines. And so a lot of people have morning routines, but actually developing an evening routine as well, where at a set time you decide, all right, I'm going to turn my phone off right now. And at a set time, you make yourself ready for bed. For those who have kids, you develop quite a bed routine often, and it starts to become a little bit consistent of like, all right, around this time, we try to have the kids in bed by. But a lot of adults don't actually do that. So I think developing that for yourself, your body loves regularity. If you go to bed in time, you typically wake up around the same time as well. And your hormone balance in your body just loves that regularity. And so I think sleep is one important one over there. I've personally seen great benefits from meditation, and I've been meditating for 10 plus years, like every morning. And it's very nice to see more and more people are starting to see the benefits from consistent meditation there. And it doesn't have to be long either. Even you sitting down for 10 minutes in the morning and just breathing in and out and focusing on yourself and having a nice meditation session there. And occasionally throughout the day, even taking 1 minute of like some box breathing, like breathing in and out at a consistent rhythm. Those little things can already start making a difference. I think too many people start to focus on like this one thing that they have to do, but I think it is more how you operate throughout the day, your overall stress management, your overall. Too many people just nonstop in their phone, nonstop looking at the news, nonstop to-do list and a lot going on. Do less, do things intentionally, and turn your phone off from time to time. Like those little, like so many people just feel that they're glued to their phone. Look around you when you walk in public. Everyone is in their phone. I think just snapping out of that and becoming a little bit more mindful can make a big difference in the stress management there too.
Yeah, I think we are at borderline life coaching right now, but I really like it because it's so important. You're right that um, specifically on the phone usage and social media, we are here, but we are never here, right? We just engrossed in our own world, and that is pretty imaginary, and the world that possibly doesn't even exist. So very, very true. It does make a lot of sense what you said. And I was speaking with Dr. Amy Bender a few weeks ago, who's a sleep researcher, and she kept saying that if you sleep for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, and you think you're cool, you will get through it and you don't need any more sleep. It's only a matter of time. It's going to come back to you. No
Yeah.
one can recover, right?
Yeah, 100%. And as much as this might seem like life coaching and way out there, this has a
Yeah,
direct impact on your running
exactly.
performance. And this
Yeah.
is where I think having these fundamentals in place will make you a better runner in the long term. So
Yeah, no, and it's very important, Floris, that you said this, that running cannot be secluded from life. It's a way of living as well, and it has to be included in its entirety when we are designing our routine and life, and that is when it will start to make sense. There hasn't been a single runner I've spoken with who has not included it as part of their life. If you run and the running paces and you're meeting the heartbeat or anything else, heart rate or anything else, if it starts to give you stress, it's no more productive for you.
mhm.
So what you
Yeah,
said makes absolute sense. Okay,
yeah, for sure.
um, I wanted to move to racing. How can MAF range become a race predictor? Do you think I could simply train for 6 months or whatever duration that is in the very, very slow pace zones on the basis of the Maffetone method formula? And of course, I will improve over a period of time. But how do I account for that? What X pace at MAF is going to convert into Y pace in the marathon?
We have seen across thousands of athletes, once they
Mhm,
bring their math pace down, their
mhm.
race paces or their race results are improving. And
Yeah.
this is a fascinating one where, let's say you initially were running at a 7:30 minute per kilometer,
Mhm.
and you're going into a race, and your race, let's say you can run X, like math pace minus X amount, and that is going to be your actual race predictor.
Mhm.
Well, if your math pace is all of a sudden going to be 6 minutes per
Yeah.
kilometer, like at the same intensity, you're going to be running that much faster per kilometer, and there's 42 kilometers in a marathon.
Yeah.
So look at where you're going to be at when you're at 30K into a race, when you have used that or it's less energy to get to that point. And yes, there's different calculations out there. There's not one magic size all formula that predicts it well. Like I often
Sure.
laugh when I see some of the different predictors online, because I punch in my training and it spits out a time, and
Yeah.
it's sometimes off by 30 minutes, sometimes off by 60 minutes. But that being said, I think eventually there's going to be a baseline where you have a bit of an idea of like, all right, if I bring that, like I've seen myself, if my math pace is this, I can race a little bit faster if the conditions are like this and this and this. If the conditions are flat, if the race temperature is good, I've seen my math pace minus 15 seconds per mile is about my average race pace. And so that's about 9 seconds per kilometer.
Yeah.
But if there's wind, if there's hills, if there's other elements involved, then that formula is not going to work well. But this is what I've seen over time work well for me. This is what Dr. Phil Maffetone has seen work with several different athletes. This is what I have seen work well with different athletes. I've also seen it being more than a minute off for different athletes. But I do think this is the more you start racing and actually writing down notes and taking your learnings from what was your math base before you went into the race, and what was your race result, and what were the race conditions, what was the weather like, what was the wind, the hills, any of those things. you do eventually start drawing more and more conclusions. And you can do this either with being able to look at what was your math pace. Some other people like to look at how well were they able to finish their long runs, how well were they able to hit their interval splits. There's different ways that you can start drawing conclusions. But eventually, I think one of the best ways to improve is going out there, doing something in your training and writing down your actual notes of if it was working or not. What did you learn? And what are you going to do from there? Like I have my own podcast, The Extra Mileage Show, and I've interviewed many different like athletes and coaches and whatnot as well. And one thing across the board that keeps coming up is the importance of journaling. And you don't even have to overthink this, but just writing down a few of your key things as you finish a training run or as you just finish your actual race. And don't wait 2 days before you start writing that after race, but right away, as you are like that day, it's still fresh of mind, just start writing down. This is what I did for dinner the night before. This is what I did for breakfast in the morning. This is what I took for race day nutrition. All of these little things start helping there.
Very, very, very helpful. I think, again, this is going to be extremely productive, and people actually need to journal a number of points that you mentioned here that will help them with their running journeys. One of the applications that I see of training with the Maffetone formula that also is for beginners to get fat adapted, lose fat even. And this is something that beginner runners, specifically when they do not have a lot of mileage under their belt, or if they are returning from an injury or illness or another sedentary lifestyle, becomes a big issue. And so I think this could be another good application for beginners to use this space as a fat burning zone so that they can, over a period of time, become leaner and faster, right?
Absolutely. And even there, if you're not able to run in this heart rate zone, when you're not that well developed yet, when you're just starting out, when it might be hot, or when you're overweight, any of these things can slow you down. Well, start walking consistently. You taking 30 minutes a day, like most days of the week, and going out there consistently, you will be surprised how much of a difference that can make. But you have to put in the consistent effort. Too many people get motivated to do it for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks, and then they give up. Whereas, like, once again, zoom out. I think it's very fascinating when you look at the two different graphs. Of one graph, you have motivation. At the beginning, people are very motivated. And that motivation kind of drips, and it fades. And eventually the motivation goes down. Whereas on the other end, you're going to have what is the goal you want to accomplish. And that's a big goal in the long term, but it's going to take a while to get there. And these two are complete opposites of each other. So what do? Is you just frequently bring that goal towards you. Like, what is it that you want to accomplish? You want to lose weight. You want to finish a half marathon well. You want to run a certain marathon time. Repeat that goal very often in front of you and just set up some of these habits and routines that you keep that motivation and you keep that system in place, that you can just go out there consistently, and eventually it will become easier and your math pace starts to improve and your weight slowly will start coming off. But this is not a fast track approach. This is an approach of zooming out and actually looking at the bigger picture and truly looking out further. This is a few years out if you want to reach that optimal performance, but it's all going to start with today, really.
Yeah, you said it, golden words. Thank you so much. I think we have discussed enough on this for sure, and people will benefit a great deal. Let's spend a few minutes before we let you go on what you are doing these days, where you are busy, and how people can be in touch with, and what are some of the things people should be in touch with you for.
One of the biggest things I'm in touch with, or I'm currently doing, is I'm obviously very actively involved with my family. I have 2 young daughters. We have decided to homeschool them. So that is part of the efforts that we're doing. We're developing the next year's program with a lot of exciting things that they're going to be doing. But work-wise, there's 2 different things. I'm one of the owners of a running clothing company called Path Projects. And we've been, this is our third year out there, and that's been really fun. So we're developing running shorts and running shirts and hats and whatnot. And this is where I spent the majority of my time. And then the other big part is the Extra Milist podcast and the Personal Best program. And that's like our training program that we've developed, all based on low intensity running. And that has been a lot of fun. Like several times a week, we have Zoom calls with our different members. We go through questions, we go through different challenges people experience, how they can overcome it. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing quite a bit as well. So, but it's all around running, which is what I'm really enjoying. So.
Nice. So if our listeners and they are runners, most of them for sure, or they're aspiring to get started with their running journeys, they should take inspiration to reach out to you. And if there is anything, we will provide also the details in the show notes that will just make it easy. And you're quite popular as well, so people will know a way to figure out. Is there anything additional, Floris, that you want to tell our listeners before we terminate the call today?
No, like I think, well, actually, first of all, thank you for having me on here. I always truly enjoy talking about running, and it brings me a lot of joy when I see people trying something that might be new to them, but over time, once things start to click a little bit and you start to have that aha moment of, I'm starting to become a little bit faster at the same intensity, maybe there might be something towards this. And then you start having certain doubts, and it might be challenging and it might be hot. But I think the importance of, like we talked about, zooming out and the consistency of you setting aside an X amount of time that you're going to give this a true shot. This doesn't have to be like right away 3 months, but even you just taking 4 weeks and seeing what would it be like to actually change a bit of your workout routines. Write down some of your learnings along the way. Write down and meet up with some other people who might be, connect with some other people who might be going for this approach as well. There's many different ways to train for a race. The most important one is to stay injury-free, to find the training approach that you enjoy doing. Just going out there and consistently running and having a lot of fun with it. Like those things are the key for success. So I would say just have fun with your journey out there.
Nice, great, and motivating. Floris, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been real pleasure speaking, and we will be in touch, and we hopefully will speak soon again.
Absolutely, same here, Vikas. I really appreciate our conversation here.
Thank you.